She walked into that courtroom 7 months pregnant, and he never once looked at her face. Serena Vale sat in the back row wearing a silk dress and a slow, satisfied smile, the kind of smile that belongs on someone who has already won. She had spent 4 months building the perfect lie, forged DNA reports, a bribed geneticist, whispered words dropped like poison into the ear of the most dangerous man on the East Coast. And it worked. Every word of it worked. Because Dante Moretti, the man who could order a building emptied with one phone call, the man entire families feared, believed her over the woman carrying his child. Alina Cross sat across from her husband at that table, her hands pressed flat against her stomach, and she thought, he will look at me. He has to look at me. He never did. He signed the papers. He stood up. He walked out. And somewhere in that moment, something in Alina Cross that had never broken before finally broke. If that were you, if the person you loved most chose a stranger's word over yours, what would you do? Before we go further, if stories like this one shake something loose in your chest, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. I don't want you to miss what's coming next. And drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where everything started to fall apart. The night Serena Vale first walked into Dante Moretti's life, Alina was home making dinner. That detail matters more than it sounds, because Alina wasn't the kind of woman who made dinner because she had to. She made dinner because it was the 1 hour of the day when the world felt manageable. The smell of garlic and olive oil, the sound of water coming to a boil, the small, ordinary rhythm of standing in her own kitchen. She had given up a career in architecture when she married Dante. Not because he asked her to exactly, but because the life he carried with him didn't leave room for a woman who kept regular office hours. She told herself it was a choice. Some days she even believed it. Dante came home late that night, later than usual, which for him meant past midnight. And he kissed her on the top of her head the way a man does when his mind is somewhere else entirely. She asked how the meeting went. He said fine. She asked if he was hungry. He said he'd eaten. She stood there for a moment holding a wooden spoon, and then she turned back to the stove and kept stirring. That was the marriage. Not the violence people imagined from the outside, not the silk sheets and champagne the gossip columns sometimes suggested. It was two people in a kitchen at midnight, one of them somewhere else in their head, and the other one learning not to ask too many questions. Alina Cross had grown up understanding certain kinds of silence. Her father was a judge, stern, contained, a man who believed that emotion was a form of weakness he couldn't afford. She had learned early to read between the lines of what people said and didn't say, to hold her own feelings somewhere quiet and interior where they couldn't be used against her. Maybe that was why she and Dante worked in the ways that they did work. They were both people who had built their lives around not flinching. She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in October. She sat on the edge of the bathroom tile with the test in her hand and she cried. Not from fear, not exactly, but from the sudden, overwhelming understanding that something was going to change. Something irrevocable. She held that knowledge inside her chest for 6 hours before Dante came home. When she told him, he went still in a way she had only seen him go still a handful of times. Not the controlled stillness he showed in boardrooms and back rooms and anywhere people were watching. Something rawer than that. Something that looked, for just a second, like the man underneath the empire. "You're sure?" he said. It wasn't a question. "4 tests," she said. "I'm sure." He reached across and took her hand, and he held it, just held it, without speaking, for a long time. And Alina thought, this is it. This is the thing that finally gets us somewhere solid. She was wrong about the direction, but she wasn't wrong that everything was about to change. Serena Vale had been on the periphery of Dante's world for almost 2 years before the pregnancy. She ran a luxury event planning company that served the kind of clients who didn't advertise their names, political donors, financial executives, people in Dante's extended network who needed parties thrown and questions not asked. She was intelligent, precise, and patient in the way that genuinely dangerous people are patient. She didn't want Dante the way a woman wants a man she's attracted to. She wanted what standing next to Dante Moretti could give her. She saw the pregnancy as a problem with a solution. The solution took her 4 months to engineer. She found a geneticist named Dr. Raymond Voss, who had a gambling debt that had been quietly purchased by a shell company she controlled. She cultivated 3 people inside Dante's household staff, not through money alone, but through the slower, more reliable currency of making each of them feel seen and valued and slightly conspiratorial. She built her case the way an architect builds a load-bearing wall, from the bottom up, making sure every piece could hold weight before she added the next one. Then she waited for the right conversation. It came in February, 4 months into Alina's pregnancy, at a charity dinner that Dante attended without his wife. Alina had been having difficult mornings, and Dante had, to his credit, and he did have credit in small ways, insisted she rest. So he went alone. And Serena was there, in a dress the color of deep water, and she sat beside him at dinner and said, very quietly, almost reluctantly, as if she didn't want to be the one to say it, "I don't know if I should tell you this. I've been going back and forth about it for weeks." Dante looked at her. He had sharp eyes, the kind that had kept him alive in rooms where other men didn't survive, and he used them on her now. "Then don't tell me," he said. "People who go back and forth usually should stay back." Serena nodded slowly. "You're probably right." She picked up her wine glass. "It's just, I care about your reputation, and I've heard something that doesn't sit right with me, but you know your wife better than I do." She let that land. She took a sip of wine. She looked away. And Dante, who had survived on instinct his entire adult life, said, against every instinct he possessed, "What did you hear?" That was the crack. Not a collapse? Not yet. Just a hairline fracture in the wall. Serena had studied Dante Moretti long enough to know she only needed one. She didn't tell him everything that night. She was too smart for that. She told him just enough to plant a seed of uncertainty. Vague references to a man named Vicente, a name she knew Dante would recognize from an old business conflict, whispered suggestions that Alina had been seen somewhere she shouldn't have been, months ago, before the pregnancy. She framed it all in the language of reluctance and loyalty. "I'm only telling you because I respect you. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong." Dante drove home that night and sat in his car outside his own building for 11 minutes. Alina was asleep when he came in. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched her sleep for a long time. He didn't ask her about it. Not that night. Not the next night either. Because asking meant acknowledging the possibility, and acknowledging the possibility meant something was crumbling, and Dante Moretti had not built everything he'd built by allowing things to crumble. Instead, he started watching. Not obviously. He was too practiced for that. But small things changed. He asked questions with different edges than before. He arrived home at irregular hours. He noticed things he had told himself not to notice, and he filed them away in a part of himself that was always looking for betrayal, because that was the part of himself the life he'd chosen had carved out and hardened and could not be softened back into anything gentle. Alina felt the change before she understood it. She was perceptive, had always been perceptive. And there was something different in the quality of his silences now, a texture to them, an assessment she hadn't felt before, not directed at her. "Are you okay?" she asked him one evening. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't seem fine." He looked at her for a moment across the dinner table, and something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read. "I'm handling something," he said. "Work thing." She accepted that. She had always accepted that. Later, she would count that acceptance among the small failures that added up to catastrophe. 3 weeks after that dinner, Serena delivered the documents. She had them hand-delivered to Dante's private office by an intermediary, a manila envelope containing what appeared to be a medical report, a genetic analysis, and a series of time-stamped photographs. The report, she had told him in a brief phone call beforehand, had been given to her by a source she couldn't name, someone who worked in a testing facility and had processed a sample that should not have existed. The photograph showed Alina and a man outside a restaurant. Nothing incriminating in itself, just proximity, just the suggestion of familiarity. But placed beside forged documents with official letterheads and clinical language and a genetic probability number that read like a verdict, proximity was enough. Dante went through the envelope alone, with the door locked. He went through it twice. The number at the top of the genetic analysis, 99.997% probability of paternity, was not Dante's. He sat very still for a long time after that. Then he picked up the phone and called a man who had handled difficult problems for him for 12 years. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He spoke in the calm, measured way he used when something had moved from emotional territory into operational territory, when the thing that needed to happen next was too important to be driven by feeling. "Find out everything about Dr. Raymond Voss," he said, "and get me Marcus." Marcus was his lawyer. That same evening, Alina was in the nursery. They had begun converting the spare room, pale yellow walls, a wooden crib she had chosen herself from a small furniture maker 2 hours outside the city, when Dante appeared in the doorway. She turned around when she heard him, and she smiled because she was happy in that room, genuinely happy in a way she wasn't always able to access in the rest of the house. The expression on his face stopped her smile dead. "Dante?" "Sit down," he said. She didn't sit down. She stayed standing because something in his voice had activated something ancient and defensive in her chest. "What happened?" "I need you to tell me the truth about something," he said, "and I need you to understand that I will know if you're lying." "I don't lie to you," she said immediately, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "That's what I thought," he said. He took the envelope from under his arm. She hadn't noticed it until that moment, and he held it out to her. "Explain this to me." She took the envelope. She opened it. She read the first page and then the second, and by the third she had to sit down after all because her legs had stopped working properly. "This is wrong," she said. Her voice came out strange, too thin, not enough air behind it. Dante, this isn't right. I don't know where these came from, but they're not real. I would never, the photographs. I don't even know who that man is. This is a restaurant I went to with Carmen in September. That could be anyone. The DNA report, Alina. It's forged." She stood up, and she was shaking now. Not from guilt, but from the particular terrible kind of fear that comes when you realize you are being asked to prove a negative, when the evidence against you has been designed to be unanswerable. "Dante, look at me. Look at me. This child is yours. I have never been with anyone else. Whoever gave you this is lying to you." He looked at her, and for one moment, one terrible, pivotal moment that she would replay for the rest of her life, she thought she saw it. A flicker of something. A hesitation. The man who loved her trying to surface through the man who had built his entire empire on never being fooled, and then it was gone. "I need time to verify this independently," he said. His voice was flat now. Professional. The voice he used for problems. She was a problem. "You need time," she repeated softly. "That's what I said." She looked at him for a long moment. The nursery was small and quiet around them, the yellow walls catching the evening light, the crib half-assembled in the corner. 7 months of a life they had been building, and he was standing there telling her he needed time to verify whether it was real. "Okay," she said finally, quietly. "Take all the time you need." She handed the envelope back to him and walked past him into the hallway, and she went to the bathroom and she sat on the floor with her back against the tub, and her hands pressed flat against her stomach, against her son, though she didn't know he was a son yet, and she stayed there until she stopped shaking. It took 43 minutes, she counted. The weeks that followed were the strangest of her life. Dante had moved into the guest room without discussion or announcement. She simply woke one morning to find the closet on his side of the room undisturbed and the bed unslept in beside her. He was present in the house the way a formal acquaintance is present, polite, controlled, unreachable. He asked after her health in the mornings. He made sure the household staff knew she needed what she needed. He was, in the language of behavior rather than of emotion, technically adequate. He did not look at her the way he used to look at her. She tried twice more to talk to him about the documents. The first time he listened without speaking and then said he was waiting for the independent results, and could she please be patient? The second time he told her that relitigating the conversation wouldn't help either of them, and that he would be in touch when he had more information. She was 31 years old and 7 months pregnant, and she was living in her own home with a man who had decided she was a problem to be processed. Meanwhile, Serena Vale received a phone call. "He's running an independent check," her contact inside the house told her. "How long do we have?" "He's moving fast. Maybe 3 weeks." Serena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It needs to be done before those results come back. Move the timeline up." She had planned this phase too. The independent laboratory, a smaller facility with less security and fewer scruples, had already been approached. The sample Dante would submit would need to be processed by someone who had been prepared to produce a specific result. It cost more than the first arrangement. It cost more than she wanted to spend. She paid it without hesitation. The independent results came back in 18 days. They confirmed the original analysis. Dante received them in his office and sat with them for a long time. He called Marcus. "Drop the paperwork," he said. "Dante," Marcus said, and Marcus was not a man who pushed back, not as a habit, not in his line of work, but even Marcus hesitated. Are you certain you want to do this right now? She's 7 months? Draw up the paperwork." A pause. "Yes, sir." Alina was in the kitchen when Dante came to tell her. She was making tea, of all things. The ordinary, small, almost laughable domesticity of making tea on the morning the world collapsed. He came in and he stood at the island counter and he told her, without preamble, without apology, without anything that resembled the man she had fallen in love with, that Marcus would be in contact with her legal representative and that she would receive her fair share of assets and that she could remain in the house through the end of her pregnancy if she needed time to arrange. She set the mug down. She set it down very carefully on the counter. "Say that again," she said. He repeated himself. Cleaner this time, more formal. The way you repeat something to someone who needs to hear it clearly because there will be no further discussion. "You're divorcing me," she said. "The paperwork is being prepared. You're divorcing me while I am 7 months pregnant with your child." The way she said your child, quiet, not loud, not broken, just absolutely certain, made something shift behind his eyes, but only for a second. "The DNA, Dante." Her voice was very quiet now, very level. "I have never lied to you, not once, in everything we've been through, and we have been through things that most people can't imagine. I have never lied to you." He said nothing. "I'm asking you," she said, "one more time. I'm asking you to believe me." The silence stretched. She watched his face. She watched him choose. "The evidence is clear," he said. Something left her expression in that moment. Not anger. Anger would come later. Not grief. Grief would also come later, in waves she wasn't prepared for. What left her face in that moment was simply the last remaining fraction of hope. It went quietly, without drama. The way a light goes out when you flip the switch. "Okay," she said, for the second time, the last time. The courtroom was small and gray and smelled like old carpet. Alina sat across from Dante at a long table, their lawyers between them, a judge overhead reading documents with the mild, professionally disinterested expression of a man who had signed too many of these papers to feel their weight anymore. She was wearing a blue dress because she had refused to dress for grief. She was 31 years old, and her feet were swollen, and her back ached, and the son she didn't yet know was a son moved inside her as if to remind her he was still there, still waiting for a world to be born into. She kept her hands flat on the table. She kept her eyes on Dante's face. He did not look at her once, not when the lawyers spoke, not when the judge asked for signatures, not when the papers slid across the table and Dante picked up the pen and signed his name with the same controlled precision he brought to everything, every decision, every judgment he had ever handed down in every room where he was the most powerful person present. He signed the papers. He stood up. He walked out. And in the hallway behind him, unseen by anyone in that room except the one person who mattered, Serena Vale's carefully managed expression broke. Just for a second, just a flash of something raw and satisfied and hungry, before she smoothed it back into concern and followed him through the door. Alina sat at the table for 3 minutes after everyone else left. She pressed both hands against her stomach. She breathed. Then she stood up, gathered her bag, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. And in the mirrored walls of that elevator, in the last moment before she walked out of Dante Moretti's world, she looked at herself, really looked, and she made a decision. She was not going to wait. She was not going to hope. She was not going to spend one more moment of her life or her son's life in the orbit of a man who chose a stranger's lie over her truth. She was going to leave. She was going to build something, and she was going to make sure that whatever her child became, he would never, not for a single day of his life, believe that love required you to prove you deserved it. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She walked out into the rain. Behind her, in the back of a black limousine pulling away from the curb, Dante Moretti stared out the window at the gray sky and told himself he had made the right decision. He told himself the feeling in his chest, the cold, heavy, wrong feeling, was what justice always felt like when it cost you something. He was wrong about that too. But it would be a long time before he understood just how wrong. Outside, the rain came down. Alina walked, and somewhere inside her, Noah Moretti waited to be born into a world his father had already abandoned. Not because he didn't love him, but because he had loved his own certainty more. That was the thing about Dante Moretti that no enemy had ever been able to use against him. Serena Vale figured it out in 4 months. His pride wasn't just a flaw, it was a door. And she had walked right through it. The coastal town of Marin's Cove didn't appear on most tourist maps. It was the kind of place that existed between bigger places. A 2-hour drive south of the city along a highway that ran out of ambition somewhere past the third rest stop. The main street had a hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy, and a small post office staffed by a woman named Gloria, who knew everyone's business and kept most of it to herself. The ocean was close enough that you could smell it from the grocery store parking lot on windy days. Alina Cross arrived on a Tuesday in April with 2 suitcases, a cashier's check, and a name she'd stopped using. She had rented a small house 3 blocks from the water through an agency in the city, paid 6 months up front, cash, under her mother's maiden name, Reyes. The house was narrow and old, and the kitchen faucet dripped at night, and the bedroom window faced a neighbor's fence. She stood in the middle of the living room the first evening with both suitcases still by the door, and she looked at the water-stained ceiling and the scuffed hardwood floors, and she thought, good, this is something I can fix. She fixed the faucet herself. She found a YouTube tutorial and spent 40 minutes on the bathroom floor with a wrench and a replaced washer and a great deal of quiet, focused swearing. When the dripping stopped, she sat back against the wall and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Competent. That was the word. Just competent. Small and specific and hers. She was 8 weeks from her due date. She did not call anyone from her old life. Not Carmen, who had been her closest friend through most of her marriage, and who would have come immediately and without question, but who also had a husband who ran in circles adjacent to Dante's, and Alina could not afford that proximity right now. Not her father, the judge, who would have come with legal advice and withheld emotion and the particular kind of help that made you feel worse for receiving it. She called a local OB/GYN practice, made an appointment, and introduced herself as Elena Reyes. The doctor, a soft-spoken Jamaican woman named Dr. Adayeze Mensah, did not ask unnecessary questions. She reviewed Alina's medical history with professional care, confirmed the pregnancy was progressing normally despite the obvious stress markers, and told her that the baby was positioned well and that she had healthy instincts and should trust them. Alina cried in the parking lot afterward. Not from sadness, or not only from sadness, from the sheer, exhausting relief of being spoken to like a person. Noah Elijah Reyes was born on a Sunday morning in early June in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, with Dr. Mensah on one side and a labor nurse named Patricia on the other, and no one else. The labor was 17 hours. The last 4 were the hardest thing Alina had ever done. She held on to Patricia's hand during the worst of it, and Patricia talked to her in a low, steady voice about absolutely nothing, about her nephew's soccer game, about the new coffee machine in the break room, about the weather outside. And it helped, somehow, being tethered to something ordinary while something extraordinary and brutal was happening to her body. When it was over, when they placed him on her chest, red-faced and furious and already so entirely himself, Alina looked at him for a long time without speaking. She had been afraid, in the months preceding this moment, that when she looked at him, she would see Dante. That she would see the courtroom, the papers, the particular cut of the pen across the signature line. She had been afraid that love and grief would arrive tangled together, and she wouldn't be able to separate them. What she felt was nothing like that. What she felt was the clean, annihilating clarity of a woman who understood, for the first time, exactly what she was here to do. "Hi," she said to him, quietly. Just the two of them. "I've been waiting a long time." He stopped crying when she spoke. She would tell him that story later, when he was old enough to roll his eyes at it. But it was true. He stopped crying and turned his face slightly toward the sound of her voice. She named him Noah, She gave him her mother's maiden name. She did not put a father's name on the birth certificate. That was the only moment she allowed herself to be angry on paper. The rest of it, she buried. Back in the city, 600 miles north, Serena Vale was redecorating. She'd moved into the penthouse 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Not all at once. Not in a way that could be called obvious or aggressive. She was smarter than that. She began with small things. A vase she'd brought from her own place that she said worked better with the light in the living room, a throw blanket on the couch, a set of coffee cups she'd picked up at a boutique in the arts district because she noticed Dante's were chipped. Each individual thing was reasonable. Each individual thing was, on its own, meaningless. Together, they amounted to occupation. Dante's longtime housekeeper, a 64-year-old Cuban woman named Rosa Fuentes, noticed. Rosa had worked for Dante for 11 years. She had weathered the early years of his empire, the years of violence and consolidation, and the particular atmosphere of controlled paranoia that settles over powerful men who've made lasting enemies. She had also worked through his marriage to Alina, whom she had loved in the uncomplicated, practical way of someone who appreciated being treated with dignity and whose sudden disappearance she had privately considered a catastrophe. Rosa watched Serena rearrange the kitchen and said nothing. She watched Serena instruct the weekend security staff to check in with her rather than with the head of household operations and said nothing. She watched Serena have a 40-minute conversation with the man who handled Dante's personal scheduling, a conversation to which Rosa was not privy, but whose outcome resulted in 2 standing appointments being quietly moved, and Rosa said nothing out loud. But she started paying attention in a different way. Dante, for his part, was not a man who noticed domestic details. He noticed power dynamics, threat assessments, the way a room changed when someone entered it with bad intentions. He did not notice throw blankets or coffee cups. He did not notice the slow, patient reorientation of small authorities inside his own home. What he noticed in those first months was that the thing in his chest that he told himself was the cost of justice continued to feel worse rather than better. He threw himself into work with the totalized focus of a man who needed to not think. There were 3 expansion projects in negotiation: a territorial dispute with a family out of Baltimore that required careful management, a political contact who was making noises about renegotiating the terms of their arrangement. There was always something. The empire was a living thing that required constant feeding and constant vigilance, and it was, Dante knew, the most reliable thing in his life. The thing that had never disappointed him because he had never allowed himself to expect anything from it except what it was. It was enough. It had always been enough before. It was not enough now. He did not think about Alina during the day. He was disciplined about that, the same discipline he applied to everything. And during daylight hours, between meetings and calls, and the endless logistics of maintaining a criminal empire with legitimate cover, he managed not to think about her. At night, it was different. He didn't dream about her. He wasn't a man who remembered his dreams with any clarity. But he woke, sometimes, at 3 or 4 in the morning with a specific heaviness. Not quite grief, not quite guilt, but something occupying the same neighborhood. And he lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling until it dissolved back into the ordinary blankness of insomnia. He told himself it would pass. It didn't pass. 6 weeks after the divorce, Serena came to him with the idea of formalizing things. Not marriage. She was intelligent enough not to push that, not yet, but visibility. Public appearances together. A transition from whatever ambiguous territory they currently occupied into something acknowledged, something that signaled to the people around him that the arrangement had moved from temporary to permanent. They were in the study when she brought it up. Dante was at the desk. She was on the couch across the room, legs crossed, holding a glass of wine with the ease of someone who had decided they were allowed to be comfortable here. "People talk," she said. "The ambiguity doesn't serve you." "People in my world talk regardless," he said, without looking up from the document he was reading. "Your lieutenants are watching to see what this looks like," she said. "Right now it looks undefined. Undefined reads as weakness." He looked up at that. She knew he would. She'd timed the word carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" he said. "I'm proposing that we stop pretending this is something other than what it is," she said. She kept her voice easy, reasonable. She was very good at reasonable. "I've been here. I've been useful to you. I've helped manage the Hargrove situation and the contact in the mayor's office and the thing with the DeLuca accounts. which you know would have been messier without me. I'm not asking for a title. I'm asking for acknowledgement. Dante set the document down. He looked at her across the room. There was something in his expression that Serena had learned to read carefully, a particular quality of assessment, the look of a man taking inventory rather than feeling anything. She didn't find it threatening. She found it manageable. She had been managing it for months. "We'll see," he said. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. And Serena Vale had been working with not yet no's her entire career. She smiled at him. She picked up her wine. She changed the subject. Meanwhile, in a back office on the 14th floor of the Moretti Group's financial building, Marco DeLuca was doing math that didn't add up. Marco had been Dante's head accountant for 9 years. He was a small, meticulous man with reading glasses. He was always losing and a habit of eating the same turkey sandwich every day for lunch. Not from lack of imagination, but from a deep, abiding conviction that predictability in small things freed up mental bandwidth for important things. He had a wife, 2 daughters in middle school, and a mortgage that he was on track to pay off in 7 years, which he found satisfying in a way that was difficult to articulate to people who weren't accountants. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He found it on a Wednesday afternoon in August, 3 months after the divorce, while running a routine audit of the operating accounts for 3 shell companies that handled legitimate tax shelter operations for Moretti Group assets. The numbers on the screen did not match the numbers in the ledger, not by a rounding error, not by the kind of small discrepancy that sometimes appeared between electronic and manual records, and could be traced back to a data entry mistake or a timing difference in processing. They were off by $430,000, distributed across 7 transactions over 11 weeks, moved through a routing path that was technically within the existing system architecture, but structured in a way that Marco had never seen before. Someone had built a new road through the existing infrastructure and hoped no one would notice. Marco printed the records. He sat with them for 2 hours. He cross-referenced every transaction 3 times. He did not eat his sandwich. Then he picked up his phone, put it back down, picked it up again, and sat for another 20 minutes thinking about what it meant to bring this to Dante directly, versus what it meant to bring it to the compliance officer, versus what it meant to take it home and sleep on it first. He took it home and slept on it, or tried to. At 2 in the morning, he got up and sat at the kitchen table with the printouts and his laptop and a glass of water, and he traced the routing path as far as he could without triggering any additional flags in the system. The road ended at a holding company he didn't recognize, a name that meant nothing to him, registered in Delaware, with a registered agent address that matched 3 other shell entities in a different sector of the portfolio. He recognized the architecture. He'd seen structures like this before, not inside Moretti Group, but outside it. In his previous life, before Dante, he'd done forensic accounting work for a firm that handled corporate fraud cases. This was money leaving the building through a side door that had been built specifically to be invisible. He sat there for a while longer. Then he wrote a name on the printout, the name he'd traced the holding company's registration documents back to through 2 layers of corporate shield, and he circled it. The name was SVE Holdings. He didn't know what it stood for yet. He was going to find out. 3 days later, Rosa Fuentes was doing laundry. This was not unusual. Rosa did laundry every Thursday morning with the efficiency of someone who considered disorganization a mild form of moral failure. What was unusual was that while she was moving items from the washer to the dryer, in the service hallway adjacent to the penthouse's back entrance, she heard voices from the small sitting room that connected to the back hall, a room that was rarely used, that had been Alina's preferred spot for morning reading, and that Serena had already expressed an intention to convert into a dressing room. Rosa turned off the dryer. She stood very still. 2 voices. Serena's, low and precise, and a man's voice she didn't recognize, not one of the regular staff, not one of Dante's lieutenants. She'd spent 11 years cataloging every voice in this household. "The Voss situation is handled," the man's voice said. "Handled how?" Serena's voice. "He's been moved. New facility, different name. The original records are gone from the database." A pause. "And the samples?" "Destroyed." Another pause, longer this time. "What about the chain of custody documentation?" "There was never a proper chain," the man said. "That was the point." Rosa did not move. She was 64 years old, and she had spent her life learning when to be invisible, and this was one of those moments. She stood in the service hallway with a wet towel in her hands, and she listened to the rest of the conversation. And by the time it ended and the man left through the back entrance and Serena's heels clicked away down the main hallway, Rosa had heard enough. She finished the laundry. She folded everything precisely. She made no visible change in her behavior for the rest of the day. That evening, she called her nephew, who worked for a private investigations firm. She did not call Dante. Not yet. She was 64 years old. She had learned the hard way that powerful men needed evidence before they needed information, and that information delivered too early was just noise. She was going to wait until she had something he couldn't dismiss. The thing about Dante Moretti that the people around him sometimes forgot, and Serena had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was that for all his reputation, for all the deliberate projection of invulnerability, he was in certain fundamental ways deeply perceptive when he chose to be. The trouble was that he chose to deploy that perception outward, against enemies, against threats, against the world that had always been trying to take what he'd built. He had never learned to turn it inward. He had never developed the habit of doubting himself. That was what Serena had recognized and exploited. But perception, once activated, doesn't stay where you direct it. In September, 5 months after the divorce, Dante called his head of security, a former Army Ranger named Cole Briggs, who had been with him for 7 years, into the office and asked him to run a background check on Dr. Raymond Voss. Cole looked at him steadily. The geneticist. Yes. The one who certified the DNA results. That's what I said. Cole nodded once. He asked no follow-up questions. He turned and left the room. Dante sat for a moment in the silence he'd created, and then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a file he'd been looking at intermittently for the past 3 weeks. It was thin, just a few pages, and it contained nothing definitive, just the beginning of a question he hadn't wanted to ask himself. The timeline, the dates, the sequence of events between Serena's first suggestion and the arrival of the documents, laid out end to end the way he laid out every operational sequence, looking for the gaps. There were gaps. Not obvious ones, not the kind that would have been visible when he was inside the grief and the fury and the sense of betrayal that had driven every decision in that period. But visible now, from the distance of months, to a man trained to see gaps in things. The independent results had arrived too quickly. He'd sent the sample to a facility that normally took 3 to 4 weeks for standard paternity processing. He'd received results in 18 days. At the time, he'd registered it as expedited, attributed it to the urgency he'd communicated, moved on because the results had said what the first results said, and moving on was easier than re-examining. Now he was examining. He picked up the phone and called Marcus. The independent lab we used in March, he said. The one you sourced. A pause on the other end. Marcus was a careful man. A careful pause. Yes? Who recommended it? Another pause. Longer. It came through a referral. From the contact at the financial firm. I believe it was... I would need to check my records. Check them, Dante said. Today. He hung up. He sat with the file for another few minutes. Then he took it and locked it in the safe behind the bookshelf. Not because he was afraid someone would find it, but because he needed it somewhere separate from his desk, somewhere he had to make a deliberate choice to access, because he was not ready yet to let himself fully understand what he might be about to find. He wasn't ready to be wrong. Not about this. Not about Alina. Because if he was wrong about Alina, then he had done something, had signed something, had said something, had walked out of something that could not be called a mistake. A mistake was what happened when you acted without information. What he had done was choose information he wanted over a woman who was telling him the truth. And those were not the same thing, and he knew it. And the knowing of it was the reason the cold feeling in his chest at 3 a.m. was not going away. He was not ready to live with that yet. But the evidence was accumulating whether he was ready or not. Marco De Luca came to him 3 days later. He arrived without an appointment, which was unusual, and he asked the assistant to tell Dante he needed 10 minutes on a financial matter, which was the phrasing he used for things that couldn't be put in an email or discussed on a phone. Dante's assistant relayed this, and Dante, who trusted Marco's judgment completely, told her to send him in. Marco sat down across the desk with a folder on his lap and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the expression of a man who had not slept well in recent days. "There's money leaving the operating accounts," Marco said. He opened the folder and put the printouts on the desk facing Dante. "Through a structure I didn't build and wasn't briefed on. 430,000 so far. Here are the transactions." Dante looked at the printouts without touching them. "How long?" 11 weeks. It started in mid-June." "Where's it going?" Marco pointed to the circled name at the bottom of the last page. "SVE Holdings, registered in Delaware. I've traced 2 layers of the corporate structure. It connects to a parent entity that I haven't been able to fully identify yet, but the registered agent matches entities I found linked to a luxury events company called Vail Incorporated." The name registered in Dante's face as something that didn't move but changed temperature. "You're certain," Dante said. "I'm certain about the trail," Marco said carefully. "I'm telling you what the numbers say, what they mean. That's your call." Dante looked at the printouts for a long moment. He did not ask Marco to leave. He did not thank him. He did not do anything that would have looked to an outside observer like a response to information that was, in the context of everything else accumulating in the back of his mind, beginning to form the shape of something catastrophic. He said, "Don't discuss this with anyone. Not compliance, not legal, not anyone on staff. Come directly to me with anything else you find." Marco nodded. He picked up the folder. He stood up to leave. At the door he paused. He turned back. He was not a man who typically ventured outside his lane, and everything about the set of his shoulders said he knew this was outside his lane, but he said it anyway. Dante. The timing on those transactions. They started 3 weeks after Mrs. Moretti, after Alina, left. Dante looked at him. "I'm just noting the timing," Marco said. "That's all." He left. Dante sat very still for a very long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Cole Briggs. "The Voss background check," he said. "I was about to call you," Cole said. "There's something you need to see. Come now." Cole arrived 12 minutes later with a tablet and the particular expression of a man who had found something he wished he hadn't. He pulled up a photograph on the screen, security camera footage, exterior, time-stamped, and he set the tablet on the desk facing Dante without saying anything. The footage showed a parking structure, 2 people standing beside a car. The timestamp read 8 months ago, 2 months before Serena had first brought the allegations to Dante at the charity dinner. One of the people was Dr. Raymond Voss. The other was Serena Vail. They were not arguing. They were not strangers. They were standing close, speaking with the easy posture of people who had met like this before. And at one point, Voss handed Serena a small envelope, and she put it in her bag without looking at it, the casual efficiency of an exchange completed between people who had done exchanges before. Dante looked at the photograph for a long time. He looked at it the way he had looked at the DNA reports, with the same exhausting effort of a man trying to make evidence conform to what he already believed. And he could not do it. He could not make Serena Vail standing with Dr. Raymond Voss 8 months before she walked into his life with accusations against his wife into anything other than what it was. He set the tablet down. He pressed both hands flat on the desk. The same gesture Alina had used at the table the night he'd given her the envelope, though he didn't know that. He wouldn't know that for a long time. "Pull everything we have on Voss," he said. His voice was very quiet. "And on the second lab, and get me the full registration trail on SVE Holdings." "How far do you want me to go?" Cole asked. Dante looked up. "All the way," he said. Cole left. Dante sat alone in the study. The afternoon light was coming through the windows at an angle that made everything look slightly amber, slightly warm, the kind of light that doesn't match the moment it falls on. He reached into his jacket pocket. A habit, an old one, something he'd done without thinking for years. And his hand closed around nothing because he'd stopped carrying the photograph a few months after the wedding, when he'd decided that sentiment was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. He hadn't thought about that photograph in a long time. He thought about it now. Alina, laughing at something off camera, her hair loose, her face open in the unguarded way it was only when she didn't know she was being watched. He'd taken that photo himself, on the 3rd day of their honeymoon, when she'd turned around to say something and he'd caught the moment before she finished turning, when she was still laughing at whatever she'd been laughing at before. He'd carried it for 2 years. He remembered the last time he'd seen her face with that expression. Open, unguarded, not performing for anyone. It was the night she'd told him about the pregnancy. The way she'd looked at him after he took her hand and held it. The particular private quality of her relief. He had believed in that moment that he knew her completely. He stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the city. His city. The one he'd built from nothing through a decade of strategy and brutality and calculated risks. And for the first time in longer than he could account for, the view did not give him anything. Somewhere in this city, or somewhere beyond it, Alina Cross was raising a child that might be that the evidence was beginning to insist was his son. And he had put her there. He had signed his name to it and stood up and walked out of the room without looking at her face. The cold feeling in his chest that he'd been managing for months cracked open then, not dramatically, not with any of the external quality he associated with breaking, but quietly, the way things break when no one is watching, when the structure has been compromised so long and so thoroughly that what finally gives is not the surface but the foundation. He pressed his hand against the window glass. He stayed there for a long time. In the parking structure below, a black SUV was pulling out. Serena, heading to a lunch she'd mentioned at breakfast, perfectly timed, perfectly ordinary. Dante watched it go. He watched the taillights disappear around the corner, and he thought for the first time the complete and fully formed version of the thing he had been almost thinking for months. What if I destroyed my own family? The question arrived without mercy. It did not leave. The forensic investigation took 11 days. Dante didn't sleep much during those 11 days. He ate when Rosa put food in front of him, which she did at regular intervals with the quiet, purposeful efficiency of someone who understood that a man running on nothing but adrenaline and self-recrimination was a man making poor decisions. He didn't acknowledge the food out loud. He ate it. Rosa considered that sufficient. He had given Cole Briggs a list of specific tasks and an unlimited operational budget, and one instruction: tell me everything, and tell me in sequence, and don't editorialize. Cole did not editorialize. He was not that kind of man. The results came in pieces, the way evidence always does. Not as a single revelation, but as an accumulation, one thread pulled, and then another, the fabric of the deception coming apart in sections rather than all at once. The first thread was Dr. Raymond Voss, who had not, as it turned out, relocated voluntarily. He had been moved. This was the word his former colleagues used when pressed, moved, with the careful vagueness of people who knew better than to be specific, to a private research facility in rural Connecticut under terms that included a significant financial arrangement and a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive. It covered not only his professional activities but his personal communications for the preceding 3 years. The facility was owned by a holding company. The holding company's parent entity was SVE Holdings. Cole laid that on the desk without comment and watched Dante's jaw tighten and said nothing. The second thread was the independent laboratory, the one Marcus had sourced, the one that had returned results in 18 days. Marcus had checked his records, as instructed, and reported back with the particular discomfort of a man who had discovered he'd been used without knowing it. The referral had come from a financial contact named Gerald Hurst, who worked for a firm that did legitimate consulting work for several Moretti Group subsidiaries. When Cole ran Hurst, he found that Hurst had a secondary consulting arrangement, undisclosed, recent, 6 months old, with Vail Incorporated. The laboratory itself, when Cole's people made discreet inquiries through a forensic auditor operating under a cover identity, had processed 11 paternity cases in the preceding year. 10 were legitimate. One, sirs, case number 7, dated March, matching Dante's submission window exactly, had been flagged internally by a junior technician who'd noticed a processing irregularity and then been transferred to a different department 3 days later and given a raise. The junior technician's name was Priya Anand. She was 26 years old and had a student loan debt and a strong, inconvenient conscience. Cole found her at home on a Thursday evening. She opened the door to a man she didn't know and looked at the credentials he presented. Not police credentials, something more ambiguous and therefore more serious. And she said, before he'd asked a single question, "I've been waiting for someone to come." She told Cole everything. The irregularity she'd found. The sample submission form that had listed a collection date 3 days before the sample had actually arrived in the lab's possession. A small clerical impossibility that only mattered if you understood what it meant about chain of custody. She told him about the transfer and the raise and the conversation she'd had with her supervisor in which the word thorough had been used in a way that clearly meant silent. She told him she had kept a copy of the original processing log because she hadn't known what to do with it and hadn't been able to make herself destroy it. She gave Cole the copy. He drove back to the city that night. He put the processing log on Dante's desk at 11:30 in the evening without preamble and said, "The sample was substituted. The DNA tested in March was not from your submitted collection. Someone in the intake process had access to a different sample, one with predetermined results, and ran it instead." Dante looked at the processing log. He looked at the date discrepancy. He looked at it for a long time. "The original sample I submitted," he said. "Do we know where it went?" "No," Cole said. "It's gone from the chain of custody, destroyed or removed before anyone looked for it. Can we get another sample, something preserved, something from before all of this?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "That depends on what you have access to." Dante sat back. He pressed his fingers against his mouth, an uncharacteristic gesture, one that belonged to a younger version of him, the version that still showed uncertainty on his face. Alina had a prenatal workup at our family physician, 12 weeks into the pregnancy. Dr. Emil Harrow. He collects and preserves blood work as standard practice. He's old-fashioned. He keeps physical samples on site. "For how long?" "I don't know. Long enough, maybe." He picked up the phone. He looked at the time, 11:42, and then dialed anyway. Dr. Harrow was 71 years old and had been the Moretti family's personal physician for 20 years, which meant he answered his phone at 11:42 at night without audible complaint. "Emil," Dante said. "The prenatal blood work from Alina's pregnancy. The 12-week draw. Do you still have the sample?" A long pause. The particular pause of an elderly doctor who understands exactly why he is being asked this question at this hour. "Yes," Dr. Harrow said. "I have it. I keep everything for 5 years. Standard practice. I need an independent paternity analysis, the most comprehensive one available. I need it done externally by a lab you choose yourself, and I need the chain of custody documented from the moment the sample leaves your facility." Another pause. "Dante." The old man's voice was careful. "Do you understand what you might be asking me to tell you?" "Yes," Dante said. "I understand. This will take 2 to 3 weeks for a proper analysis. Then start tomorrow." He hung up. He sat in the study alone for an hour after Cole left. The house was quiet around him in the way that houses are quiet late at night. Not silent, but settled, full of the small sounds of infrastructure and the absence of anyone moving through the rooms. He could hear, faintly, the distant sound of the city outside the windows. He had always found that sound reassuring, the proof that the world continued operating while he worked. Tonight it sounded like something else, like time passing, like the specific irreversible quality of time that has already passed and cannot be called back. He thought about Noah, not about the question of Noah. He'd been thinking about that question for weeks. He thought about the actual fact of a child existing somewhere. A child who was, by now, several months old. A child who had never met him. A child who was being raised by a woman alone in a place Dante didn't know, under a name he hadn't been given, with no connection to this study or this city or this life that Dante had built and destroyed, and was now sitting inside at midnight trying to figure out how to survive having been wrong. He had built his reputation on never being wrong. He had destroyed his family on exactly that conviction. Serena came downstairs at 12:30, appearing in the study doorway in a silk robe, her hair down, projecting the performance of natural domesticity she'd been refining for months. She looked at him at the desk, and she said, "You need to sleep." He looked at her across the room. He had, in the preceding weeks, become very careful about his face when she was in it. He'd spent a lifetime controlling his expressions, and he called on that discipline now with a totality that cost him more than anything had cost him in years. To look at her and show her nothing, while his mind was running calculations he had not yet finished. "I know," he said. She came into the room and put her hand on his shoulder as she passed, the easy, proprietary gesture of a woman who had decided she belonged here, and she said something about a gallery event she was planning for Thursday, and did he want to attend, and it would be good for visibility, And he said maybe, and she accepted that and went back to bed. He sat in the study until 3 in the morning. He did not sleep. The next 11 days were the longest of Dante Moretti's adult life, and he had lived through some long days. He continued his normal operations with the mechanical discipline of a man running on structure because he had nothing else to run on. He attended meetings. He made decisions. He managed the Baltimore situation and the political contact and the quarterly review of the legitimate financial operations that made everything else possible. He sat across from Serena at breakfast and dinner and said normal things in a normal tone of voice and watched her the way you watch something that is standing very close to the edge of something without knowing it. She was meticulous. He had to give her that. She was meticulous and patient, and she had anticipated nearly every angle, except the one she couldn't have anticipated, which was that she had built her entire operation on a precise knowledge of Dante Moretti's pride, and she had not factored in the possibility that grief could eventually work on pride the way water works on stone. Slowly, without announcing itself. Until one day the surface is something different. On the 12th day, Dr. Harrow called. Dante was alone in the study. He answered on the second ring. The old doctor did not offer preamble. He was 71 years old and had learned over a long career that preamble in moments like this one was a form of cruelty. "The analysis is complete," he said. "Dante, the child is yours." The study was very quiet. "The probability?" Dante said. His voice came out level, which was something he would not have predicted. 99.98%. Standard paternity threshold is 99.0. This is unambiguous. A pause. The original report was not just inaccurate. The sample it tested was genetically incompatible with any biological child of yours. Whoever ran that analysis did not test your DNA at all. They tested someone else's. Dante set the phone on the desk. He did not hang up. He simply set it down, and he sat there. And Dr. Harrow's voice continued saying something careful and professional from the phone's speaker, and Dante heard none of it. He heard, instead, the sound of Alina's voice from the night in the nursery. "I have never been with anyone else." He heard the sound of the courtroom, the scratch of his own pen across the signature line. He heard Alina saying, "Okay," for the second time, in the voice of a woman who had exhausted the last of something and was choosing to carry what remained by herself. He heard those things very clearly. Then he picked the phone back up. "Emile," he said, "I need the full report, everything. Chain of custody, lab certifications, full genetic panel. Send it to my personal address, not the office." "It's already prepared," the doctor said, quietly. I am very sorry, Dante." Dante thanked him. He ended the call. He sat for exactly 4 minutes. He knew it was 4 minutes because he watched the clock on the wall, something he never did, usually. And he gave himself those 4 minutes because he was about to do something that required him to be completely controlled. And he was not completely controlled right now, and he understood that the gap between not controlled and controlled was exactly 4 minutes wide. At the 4-minute mark, he stood up. He opened the safe. He took out the file he'd been building. He added the forensic report to it. He put everything in a new folder, clean, labeled in his own handwriting with nothing that would mean anything to anyone who wasn't him. Then he called Cole Briggs and said 3 words, "Bring her in." Cole knew exactly who her was. He'd known for 2 weeks that this call was coming. "When?" "Tonight," Dante said. "After dinner. I want her calm, and I want her comfortable, and I want her to have no reason to think anything is different." "And after?" "After," Dante said. "I want to know everything, from the beginning, and I want it on record." He put the phone in his pocket. He went upstairs and changed his shirt. He came back down and poured 2 glasses of wine and set them on the coffee table in the living room. He sat on the couch. He waited. Serena came home at 6:15 with shopping bags from a boutique in the Arts District and the pleasantly self-satisfied air of someone who had spent the afternoon being catered to. She set the bags down at the foot of the stairs, noticed the wine, noticed Dante on the couch, and a small, automatic smile moved across her face. The smile of a woman who had worked very hard to create exactly this tableau. "This is unexpected," she said. "Sit down," Dante said. He kept his voice even, easy. He gestured to the couch across from him. She sat. She picked up her wine. She looked at him with the particular expression she used for moments she couldn't read yet. Attentive, pleasant, waiting. I want to talk about Dr. Raymond Voss, Dante said. The expression didn't change. It almost didn't change. But Dante Moretti had been reading faces in rooms where reading faces wrong meant dying, and he caught it. The half-second flicker, less than a flinch, more than nothing, in the muscles at the corner of her left eye. The geneticist, she said, from the DNA case. Yes. He set his wine down. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, and he looked at her with the full, unshielded attention he usually reserved for people who owed him things. Tell me how you know him. I don't know him, she said. Smooth, immediately smooth, the reflexive smoothness of someone who had prepared for questions. Just not this one, not right now, not tonight. I know who he is. You told me about him when you were going through the divorce. I showed you a security photograph this afternoon, Dante said. He had not. There was no security photograph on the table, no folder in his hands. He had nothing visible. You and Voss in the Riverside parking structure, 8 months before you brought the allegations against Alina. Tell me about that meeting. A pause. Fractionally too long. I don't know what photograph you're talking about, she said. I've never been to the Riverside structure. Serena. His voice had changed now, lost the evenness. Not loud. He was never loud. That was the thing people who feared him least understood, but stripped of everything that wasn't direct. I'm going to tell you what I know, and then I'm going to ask you once to tell me what I don't know yet. And the degree to which you are honest with me in the next few minutes will determine what the rest of your life looks like. Do you understand? She looked at him. The pleasantness was gone from her face now, replaced by something more controlled and less legible. The face she wore, he understood in that moment, when she was making calculations. You're frightening me, she said. Not as a woman who was frightened, as a woman who had decided that performing fear was the optimal move. I know, he said. I'm explaining things clearly. Voss was on your payroll before the accusations were made. The independent laboratory was sourced through a contact with a consulting arrangement with your company. The sample tested in March was not my biological material, and the child, his voice caught just slightly, just a fraction, that I signed away is mine. The room was very quiet. Serena set her wine glass down on the coffee table. She set it down with a precision and deliberateness that told him she was buying herself 3 seconds. Dante, she said, carefully, you have been under an enormous amount of stress. Don't, he said. She stopped. Don't manage me, he said. You've been managing me for a year and I let you because I was… He stopped himself. What he'd been was something he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of hearing named. Tell me why. Another silence. The calculation behind her eyes was almost visible now. The rapid, sophisticated processing of a woman who had always had an exit prepared and was now reviewing whether this particular exit still held. I want a lawyer present, she said. This isn't that kind of conversation. You just told me. I said the rest of your life depends on what you tell me in the next few minutes, Dante said. I meant that as a practical statement, not a legal one. My lawyers are going to be involved regardless of what you say next. What changes is whether you and I have an honest conversation first. He leaned back. He picked up his wine. He looked at her over the rim of the glass with the particular patient exhaustion of a man who is done with games and willing to wait as long as it takes. Why, Serena? The silence stretched. She looked at him. He looked back. And then something shifted. It was subtle, not a collapse, not a dramatic unraveling, more like a recalibration. The face she'd worn for a year, the careful, curated presentation of a woman in love and in service, rearranged itself into something plainer and harder, and Dante thought, considerably more honest. Because you were never going to choose me, she said. Not with her there. He said nothing. I had been in your world for 2 years, she continued. Her voice was flat now. Not emotional, or not performing emotion, which was different. I knew your operation better than half your lieutenants. I had access and competence, and I had made myself indispensable to you in a dozen ways you never acknowledged, because you were too… She stopped herself. She started again. She was your wife. She was having your child. And I knew that even if the marriage was cold, even if it wasn't working, you were never going to let go of that because men like you don't let go of things they've decided belong to them. So you decided to make me let go, Dante said. I decided to show you something that would make you choose, she said. You chose. The simplicity of it, the audacity of the simplicity, landed on him like something physical. He had prepared himself for many versions of this conversation. He had not prepared himself for this version, in which she offered no elaborate justification, no deflection, no performance of regret, just the clean, stripped logic of what she had done and why. You forged the evidence, he said. Yes. You bribed Voss. Yes. You sourced the compromised laboratory through Hearst. Yes. And the household staff, the people who confirmed the timeline to me, the ones who corroborated your version of events. 3 of them, she said. Different arrangements, different leverage. They didn't know the full picture. They each knew their piece. Dante set down his wine. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, and he breathed, steadily, deliberately, because the alternative was something he could not afford to become in this room right now. There's a child, he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He's 7 months old. He doesn't know my name. Serena said nothing. She raised him alone, Dante said, still facing the window. Because of what you built. She's fine, Serena said. She has resources. He turned around. She stopped talking. He had never, in the time she had known him, looked at anyone the way he was looking at her right now. Not the controlled assessment she was accustomed to, not the calculated coldness he used for business. Something older than that. Something that had no strategic dimension at all. You're going to tell my lawyers everything, he said. Every transaction, every contact, every arrangement. You're going to document the full structure of what you built, and you're going to do it in writing with your signature on every page, and you're going to do it tonight. And if I don't? Then I stop being someone who handles things legally, he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him with the face of a woman recalculating the exit options in real time, and he watched her work through it, and he watched her arrive at the same conclusion he had already reached. There was no version of this that went well for her. There was only a version that went less badly. I want immunity, she said. You want a lawyer, he said. Get one, tonight. Because my people will be here in 2 hours, and whatever you haven't told them by morning goes into a different kind of file. He walked out of the living room. He walked down the hallway. He went into his study and closed the door, and he stood in the middle of the room and he pressed the heel of his hand hard against his sternum, against the specific location of the cold feeling that had lived there for almost a year, and he breathed through the fact that the cold feeling was still there. Was worse, in fact, more acute, sharper edged, because knowing the truth was not the same as having fixed anything. He knew the truth. Alina was still gone. Noah was still 7 months old in a town he didn't know, and in the living room down the hall, the woman who had engineered the destruction of his family was sitting on a couch and calculating the cost of her next move. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. I need the divorce filing, he said. Every document, tonight. Marcus, to his credit, asked no questions. I'll have them to you within the hour. And Marcus, the settlement, the house, the assets. Whatever she took. I want it doubled. A pause. Dante? She declined the settlement. She took nothing. The silence that followed was the heaviest silence of the night. She took nothing, Dante repeated. She declined the full package. Took only a single cashier's check, a small one, enough to relocate. Her lawyer at the time said she refused anything else. Another pause. I assumed you knew. He hadn't known. He had told himself she was taken care of. He had told himself the settlement made it not right. Nothing made it right, but manageable. Something he could file in the part of his mind where things that were over went. She had taken nothing. She had walked away with a cashier's check and her pregnancy and the shattered architecture of everything she'd believed about her marriage, and she had built a life from those materials alone. He set the phone down. He sat at the desk. He opened the folder. He looked at the forensic report, the clean, unambiguous language of science telling him what he had already destroyed, and he turned to the last page where the probability was printed in a font that was, appropriately, completely ordinary. The most consequential number in his life rendered in 12-point Times New Roman. He reached for a pen. He did not write anything. He held the pen, and he sat there, and the truth of his situation arranged itself in his mind with the same inexorable clarity that evidence always had for him. the quality he'd prided himself on, the reason he'd believed himself to be a man who made sound judgments. And the clarity was this: he had spent a year managing the wrong problem. He had been managing Serena, managing the investigation, managing the accounting discrepancies, and the lab reports, and the security footage, and all of it, every careful, methodical step, had led him back to the same place he'd been the morning after the courtroom, standing in the parking garage watching the rain. The problem was not Serena Vale. Serena Vale was going to be handled. She was already handled, sitting in the living room understanding that her options had collapsed, that the exit she'd prepared for 2 years had turned out to be a wall. The problem was that Dante Moretti needed to find his son. And to find his son, he needed to find a woman who had every reason in the world never to speak to him again. He stood up. He went to the window for the second time that night. The city was dark now, fully night, the lights below the particular cold brightness of a city that doesn't stop for anything. He thought about what she'd said in the nursery. "I have never lied to you, not once." He thought about what she'd said at the table in the kitchen when he told her about the divorce. The way she had set the mug down with such deliberate care, as if she was deciding in that moment how much of herself to keep controlled, how much to let him see. He thought about the words she'd used. Okay, both times. Not argument, not accusation. Just that word, and then she had walked away and she had not come back. She had meant it as a door closing. He understood that now. He was going to have to knock. He was going to have to knock on a door he had sealed shut himself, in a town he didn't know, carrying a forensic report and a year of absence and the specific unbearable weight of a man who had been precisely, catastrophically wrong. He had no idea if she would answer. He had no idea if she should. But he was going to find her. He was going to find her because his son was 7 months old and didn't know his name, and because Alina Cross had walked out of that courthouse carrying everything by herself, and she had done it because he had given her no choice, and the least, the absolute minimum, he could do now was to show up. And he found Marin's Cove on the 4th day. It took that long because Alina had been careful, more careful than he'd expected, which told him something about the state she'd been in when she left, that she'd had the presence of mind to cover her tracks while 7 months pregnant and freshly divorced. She'd used her mother's maiden name. She'd paid cash. She'd left no digital footprint that connected Elena Reyes of Marin's Cove to Alina Cross of the Moretti penthouse on the 42nd floor. Cole found her through the OB/GYN practice. A billing address. A name that didn't quite fit the demographic profile of the town's existing residents. A cross-reference with a business registration. A small architectural consulting firm, 18 months old, licensed under Elena Reyes, operating out of a converted ground floor space on Marin's Cove's main street. Kolu put the address on Dante's desk and said, "She built something." Dante looked at the address for a long time. Then he folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket and told Cole he was going alone. Cole opened his mouth. "Alone," Dante said. Cole closed his mouth. The drive south took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Dante drove himself, which he hadn't done regularly in years. There was always a driver, always a security detail, always the infrastructure of protection that came with being the kind of man who had accumulated the kind of enemies he had. The absence of it felt strange. The steering wheel under his hands, the highway unspooling ahead, the radio off because he didn't want noise. He wanted to think. Or maybe he didn't want to think, and the driving gave him something to do with his body while his mind went where it was going to go regardless. He thought about what he was going to say. He had been thinking about it for 4 days and he still didn't have it. Every version he constructed fell apart under its own weight. Too formal, too explanatory, too much like a man presenting a case rather than a man arriving with something broken in his hands. He had the forensic report in the folder on the passenger seat. He had Serena's signed confession, witnessed and notarized, covering every transaction and every contact and every engineered step of the deception. He had documentation that would hold up in any court in the country. None of it was the thing he needed to say. He arrived in Marin's Cove at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday in October. The town was small and gray-skied and smelled like salt, and the particular dampness of a coastal place heading into autumn. He parked on the main street and sat in the car for a few minutes. Through the windshield, he could see the front window of a ground-floor office space, a small sign in the window, clean and professional, Reyes Architectural Consulting. The lights were on inside. He got out of the car. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. A woman walked past him with a stroller without looking at him. A man came out of the hardware store across the street and loaded something into his truck. Ordinary Thursday afternoon in an ordinary small town. Dante Moretti, who had walked into rooms his entire adult life knowing that his arrival changed the temperature of those rooms, stood on the sidewalk of Marin's Cove and felt, for the first time in memory, that he had no idea what was on the other side of a door. He went in. The office was small and well organized, drafting table along one wall, a desk with 2 monitors, samples of material, and finish boards stacked in a corner with the utilitarian neatness of someone who worked in a small space and had learned to make it functional. The walls had 2 framed architectural drawings and a child's painting, blocky, colorful, clearly made by someone very young, pinned above the desk with a piece of tape. A portable crib sat folded in the corner near the back door. Alina was at the drafting table with her back to him when he came in. She was bent over something, pencil moving, and she said without turning around, "Be right with you, I'm just finishing a line." He didn't speak. She finished the line. She straightened. She turned around. The moment she saw him, she went completely still. Not the stillness of surprise, or not only that, the stillness of a person whose body has recognized something before their mind has caught up, something that requires the whole system to stop and reassess. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was different, not in ways that could be cataloged easily. She was thinner, or maybe it was the way she held herself, more upright, more settled in her own frame, like a person who had learned to take up exactly the space they needed and no more. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing work clothes, jeans, a gray sweater with a smear of pencil graphite near the cuff, and she had the look of someone in the middle of something real, something that mattered, something that had nothing to do with him. "No," she said. Just that. Not a question, not a statement of surprise, a refusal, immediate and clear, the way you say no to something your body rejects before your brain has finished processing. "Alina, you need to leave." She set the pencil down on the drafting table. Her voice was level. He'd expected anger, had braced for it, deserved it, and the levelness was somehow harder than anger would have been. "I don't know how you found this place, and I don't want to know. You need to leave." "I know what Serena did," he said. Something moved in her face. A flicker. Gone in a second. "I know everything," he said. Voss was on her payroll before she brought the accusations. The independent lab was compromised. The DNA they tested wasn't mine. I have a forensic analysis from a lab Emil Harrow sourced himself, full chain of custody, and a signed confession from Serena that covers every step of what she built. Alina didn't move. "Noah is my son," Dante said. The words came out rougher than he intended, less controlled. "He's my son, and I signed papers, and I walked out, and I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And I know that saying that—" "Stop." Her voice cracked on the word, just slightly. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him, and her eyes were bright, but her face was steady. "You don't get to come in here and tell me things I already knew and expect that to mean something." "I know. I told you. I stood in front of you and I told you, and you looked at me and you chose—" She stopped herself. She breathed. "You chose." "Yes," he said. "I did." "So why are you here?" He reached inside his jacket. He put the folder on the drafting table between them. The forensic report on top, Serena's confession beneath it. And he stepped back. He didn't push it toward her. He left it there, and he stepped back and he put his hands at his sides and he said, the thing he had been trying to construct for 4 days and hadn't been able to make presentable. "Because he's 7 months old and he doesn't know me, and that's not his fault. And because you built all of this—" He gestured slightly at the room, at the sign in the window, at the evidence of a life assembled from nothing, "while carrying everything I put on you, and you did it without asking me for a single thing. And the least I can do is show up and be honest about what I did." She looked at him for a long moment. "You came years too late," she said quietly. "I know that too." The silence between them was the specific, heavy silence of 2 people standing in the ruins of something and trying to figure out if any of it is salvageable or if the only honest thing to do is acknowledge that it isn't. Alina picked up the folder. She opened it. She read the first page of the forensic report. Not all of it, just enough. and she closed it again and set it back on the table and pressed her hand flat on the cover. "What do you want?" she said. "To know my son," he said. "That's all I'm asking for right now, just the chance to be present, whatever that looks like. Whatever you decide that means, you make the terms." She looked at him. He couldn't read her face, had never been fully able to read her face, which was one of the things he had loved about her, and one of the things that had made him, in his worst moments, distrust her. "I need time," she said finally. "Take whatever you need." "You should find somewhere to stay tonight," she said. "There's a motel on Route 9. Don't come back here without calling first." He nodded. He picked up the folder from the table. He turned to go. "Dante." He stopped. "The confession," she said. "Serena's confession. Is it real? She actually signed it?" "Witnessed and notarized," he said. "She's cooperating with my legal team. She doesn't have a choice." Alina nodded slowly. She turned back to the drafting table. She picked up her pencil. He left. He drove to the motel on Route 9 and checked in under his own name because he was done, he decided, with things done sideways. The room was small and smelled like industrial cleaner, and the heater made a ticking sound that was either the system cycling or something about to break. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he called Cole and told him where he was, and told him to keep the operation in the city running. He'd be in contact. Cole said, "How did it go?" "Oh, she said she needs time," Dante said. A pause. "That's not a no." "No," Dante said. "It's not." He hung up. He sat in the motel room for a while. Then he lay back on the bed and he stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in a year, the cold feeling in his chest was different. Not gone, not resolved, but different. Less like a verdict and more like an open question. He was asleep by 8:30. He woke at 2 in the morning to his phone ringing. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it because men in his position answered unknown numbers at 2 in the morning. "Mr. Moretti." A man's voice, professional, controlled in the specific way of someone delivering information they've rehearsed. "My name is not important. What's important is that you know Serena Vale made a call tonight from her personal cell phone to a number registered to a man named Ilya Petrov. Mr. Petrov is currently employed by the Korovin Syndicate out of Philadelphia." Dante sat up. He was fully awake immediately. That was a skill, one of the ones the life had given him that he couldn't return. "Who are you?" "Someone who has reason to want Serena Vale's plans to fail," the man said. "Petrov was contracted 3 days ago. The target is not you. The target is the child. And the woman." The room went cold. "They know where she is," the man said. "They've known for 48 hours. Serena gave them the address when she understood that her cooperation with your legal team was not going to protect her the way she hoped. The contract is leverage. The child is leverage. She's not trying to run. She's trying to rebuild her position." "When?" Dante said. His voice was something he didn't recognize, something stripped down to its lowest register. "Tomorrow morning," the man said. "Early, before the town wakes up. 4 men, 2 vehicles. They're not planning to be subtle." The line went dead. Dante was already moving. He was out the door in 40 seconds, jacket on, keys in hand, phone dialing Cole as he ran across the motel parking lot to his car. Cole answered on the first ring. "I need everyone you can move in the next 6 hours to Marin's Cove," Dante said. He was in the car, engine running, pulling out of the lot before he'd finished the sentence. 4 hostiles minimum, 2 vehicles, Korovin contract. Target is Alina and the child. "How long do we have?" "Morning. Call it 5 hours." He was on Route 9 already, pushing the car faster than the road recommended. "Cole, I need them alive. All of them. Especially whoever Petrov sends to run the operation on the ground." "Understood. I can have 4 men there in 3 hours, 6 and 4. Move them now." He hung up. He drove the 3 minutes back to the main street with his mind running at a frequency it hadn't run at in years, tactical, cold, processing threat and geography and the specific mathematics of a small coastal town at 2 in the morning with 1 road in and limited cover. He had spent a year trying not to be this version of himself. The version that calculated human beings as variables in a threat equation. Right now, he needed this version more than he'd ever needed anything. He parked outside her building. The office was dark. She lived in the apartment above. And he went up the exterior staircase and knocked on the door. Not loud. 3 knocks, deliberate. A long pause. Then her voice through the door. "Who is it?" "It's me. Open the door. There's no time." Another pause. The sound of a lock. The door opened and she was there in a robe, hair loose, with the particular alert wariness of a woman who had been a light sleeper since the night she brought a newborn home and understood that sleep was a resource to be rationed. "Dante." Serena contracted the Corvin Syndicate, he said quietly. "4 men. Tomorrow morning. They're coming for you and Noah." The color left her face. "I have people coming," he said. 3 hours. I need you to pack what you need right now. Essentials, Noah's things, and I need you to be ready to move." She looked at him. He watched her process it. Not the panic, not the disbelief, but the calculation behind her eyes, the rapid assessment of a woman who had, in 18 months, become someone who processed threats rather than collapsed under them. "How certain are you?" she said. "Certain enough that I drove here at 2 in the morning." She stepped back from the door. She turned and went into the apartment. He followed her in and closed the door behind him and stood in the small entryway while she moved through the apartment with a speed and efficiency that surprised him. A bag from the closet, specific items pulled from drawers without hesitation. The movements of someone who had mentally rehearsed some version of this because she was a woman who had lived inside danger long enough to know it could return. From a back room came a small sound, a baby stirring, not quite awake. Dante went still. Alina appeared in the doorway of the back room and looked at him. A question on her face that wasn't a question. "I'll get him," he said. His voice came out quiet, steadier than he felt. She looked at him for another moment. Then she moved aside. The room was small. A nightlight shaped like a crescent moon cast a dim gold glow across the crib in the corner. Dante crossed the room slowly. Not from caution, but because his body had made some automatic necessary adjustment to the scale of the space, to the presence of something fragile, something that required a different kind of care than anything he'd carried in his hands before. He looked into the crib. Noah was on his back, arms thrown wide in the uninhibited abandon of a sleeping infant, his face soft and flushed and absolutely, devastatingly ordinary. Dark hair. Dante's nose. There was no mistaking it, and Dante had known he would see it, and had thought he was prepared, and he was not prepared at all. A small mouth slightly open, fingers curled, 7 months old. Dante stood at the side of the crib for a moment that probably lasted 4 seconds, and felt like something much longer. Then he reached in carefully, both hands supporting the head the way you support something you cannot afford to drop, and he lifted his son for the first time. Noah made a sound. Not crying, just the soft, questioning noise of a baby displaced from warmth, registering the change. He turned his face against Dante's chest. He settled. Dante stood in that dim gold room with his son against his chest, and he breathed through the thing that was happening to him, which was not something he could name and was not something he would have allowed anyone to witness. And then he wrapped the blanket around Noah and he carried him out. Alina was in the main room with the bag ready and her phone in her hand. She saw him come out with Noah, and something moved across her face that she controlled quickly. She held out her arms. He transferred Noah carefully. Their hands touched briefly in the exchange, her fingers, his wrist, and neither of them acknowledged it. "My car," he said. "Now." They went down the exterior staircase in the dark. He went first, scanning the street, empty, quiet, the town fully asleep. She followed with Noah pressed against her shoulder. They got to the car and she got in the back with the baby, and Dante drove. He drove them to the motel first, to his room, because it was 3 minutes away and defensible, and he needed her somewhere secured while he waited for Cole's people to arrive. She sat on the edge of the bed with Noah in her lap, and she didn't speak to him and he didn't speak to her, and the silence was not the cold silence from before. It was the silence of 2 people managing a crisis together without the luxury of anything else. Cole's first 2 men arrived at 4:15. Former military, both of them, with the specific economy of movement that training and experience produces. Dante met them in the parking lot. He briefed them in 4 minutes. Street maps of the town on his phone, the address of Alina's building, the 2 most likely vehicle approach routes based on the road layout. "We don't know their timeline exactly," Dante said. "We assume early, 5 a.m., 6. We position 2 at the building, 1 on each approach route. When they arrive, we let them commit to the approach before we engage. I want them contained, not scattered. Rules of engagement? The taller of the two men asked. Non-lethal if possible. I need whoever is running this operation on the ground to talk afterward. He looked at them both. But if it comes down to a choice between that and protecting the woman and child in that room? Understood, the man said. 2 more of Cole's people arrived by 5. Dante positioned them himself, walking the dark streets of Marin's Cove in the pre-dawn quiet with his phone's flashlight and the particular focused calm that came over him in operational moments. The calm that Serena had read correctly as his greatest competency and had tried to use against him, and which was now being directed at the problem she had created. I was back at the motel by 5:20. Alina had put Noah back to sleep on the bed, surrounded by pillows, and she was sitting in the chair by the window with the curtain slightly open, watching the parking lot. She had dressed while he was out. She looked up when he came in. "Your people are in position?" she said. 4 men, 2 on the building, 2 on the approaches. She nodded. She looked back out the window. "You should try to sleep," he said. "I'm not going to sleep," she said, in the tone of someone stating an obvious fact. He sat in the other chair. The room was small and the 2 chairs were closer together than he would have chosen. He could smell Noah's baby shampoo from the bed. They sat in silence for 20 minutes. Then Alina said, without looking at him, "Did she know where I was the whole time?" "No," he said. "Cole found you 4 days ago. Serena got the information when she made the call to Petrov 3 days ago. She'd been looking, but she didn't have it until recently." A pause. "So she waited until she understood that cooperating with you wasn't going to save her?" "Yes." "And then she decided that if she was going down, she'd use Noah to—" Alina stopped. Her jaw tightened. She looked out the window. "Yes," Dante said. Another silence. "She's very patient," Alina said. "Not as a compliment, as an assessment." "She is," he said. "She's also in a position right now where patience has run out of road." Alina nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "When this is over, when tonight is handled." She paused. "I'm not going back to that life, Dante. I'm not going back to the city. I'm not going back to any of it. This—" She gestured at the room, at the sleeping baby, at Marin's Cove outside the window. "This is where we live." "I know," he said. "And I don't know what I'm willing to give you yet," she said. "With Noah. I don't know what that looks like. I need—" His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. A text from the man he'd positioned on the north approach route. 2 vehicles. Moving slow. Plates covered. He was on his feet before he'd finished reading it. "Stay here," he said. "Door locked. Don't open it for anyone who doesn't know your mother's name." She stood up too. "Carmen," she said. It was her mother's name. She said it without hesitation, automatically, and he filed it. The specific, intimate knowledge of a woman who had been his wife, and he moved toward the door. "Dante." Her voice stopped him. He turned. She looked at him across the small motel room, across the sleeping child between them, across a year of everything that had happened and everything that couldn't be undone. "Come back," she said. Simply. Without drama. The way you say something, you mean completely. He looked at her for 1 second. Then he went out the door. The street was dark, and the salt air hit him cold, and he moved fast toward the north end of Main Street where the first vehicle was now visible. A black SUV rolling slow with its headlights dimmed, the particular deliberate pace of people who believed they were operating unseen. Behind it, 40 yards back, a second vehicle. A van. The van was the problem. The van meant personnel, meant numbers, meant the people who were going to move while the SUV drew attention. Cole's man came up beside him from the shadows of a doorway. 6 confirmed, 2 in the SUV, 4 in the van. "Petrov is in the van. We ID'd him from a photo match 20 minutes ago." "Petrov is mine," Dante said. "Understood." The SUV stopped at the corner half a block from Alina's building. 2 men got out. They moved with professional efficiency toward the building entrance, and Cole's 2 men on the building moved to intercept, and the street went from silent to suddenly, violently, not silent. Voices, commands, the specific compressed chaos of a confrontation that has been planned on both sides, and is now executing in the messy reality of actual space and actual bodies. Dante was already moving toward the van. He came from the passenger side, not the driver's side, which is where defensive instinct sends people when threatened. And he pulled the passenger door open before the man inside had registered he was there. The man reached for something, and Dante caught the wrist and controlled the arm and extracted the man from the vehicle, with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom this kind of violence was not rage but mechanics, trained into the body over years until it ran below the level of thought. The man hit the pavement. Dante held the arm at an angle that made movement inadvisable. "Petrov," Dante said. "Where?" The man said nothing. Dante adjusted the angle of the arm by 7 degrees. "Back," the man said immediately. "He's in the back." Dante left him for Cole's man, who was already there, and moved to the rear of the van. He pulled the doors open. Ilya Petrov was 43 years old, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had been rearranged by violence several times and had settled into something that looked permanently aggrieved. I was reaching for a weapon when Dante grabbed him by the jacket collar and pulled him out of the van with enough force that Petrov's feet didn't find the ground before Dante had him against the side of the vehicle. "The contract," Dante said. His voice was completely level. That was the thing. The absolute, terrifying levelness of it. "Who holds it besides you?" Petrov's eyes assessed him, calculating. "You know I'm not going to—" "Serena Vale is in custody and cooperating," Dante said. "Your employer's arrangement with her is already compromised. The question is whether this ends with you in a position to negotiate or in a position where you can't negotiate anything." He held Petrov's gaze. "I've had this conversation before. It ends faster when people make good decisions early." From down the street came the sounds of the confrontation resolving. Cole's people were efficient, and the element of surprise had been complete. And within another 90 seconds, the street went quiet in a different way. The quiet of a thing concluded. Petrov looked at Dante for a long moment. He was a professional. Professionals assessed odds. "The contract dies with Vale," Petrov said finally. "It was a personal arrangement, no organizational directive. Korovin doesn't know about this." "If I verify that and it holds," Dante said, "we have room to talk. If it doesn't hold, we don't." He held the man's eyes. "Nod if you understand." Petrov nodded. Cole appeared at Dante's shoulder. "All 6 contained, no casualties. 2 of ours have minor injuries." "Get them medical." Dante released Petrov's jacket. He stepped back. He looked at Cole. "Hold him separate. I want to talk to him properly in an hour." He turned. He walked back down the main street of Marin's Cove in the breaking pre-dawn, the sky going from black to a dark, bruised gray at the eastern edge over the water. His hands were steady. His breathing was steady. The cold morning air came off the ocean, and he walked through it, and he felt the particular hollow exhaustion of adrenaline beginning to metabolize. The come-down that always followed, the return of everything the body had suspended in order to function. He was half a block from the motel when the shot came. He heard it before he felt it, the specific crack of a suppressed firearm, the sound arriving a fraction of a second before the impact registered in his left shoulder. The force of it turned him, and he went down to one knee on the sidewalk, and his hand came up automatically to the point of impact, and his hand came away red. He stayed on one knee. He breathed. Cole was yelling something behind him, running footsteps. The shot had come from the rooftop of the hardware store across the street. A 7th man, positioned separately, a contingency that neither Cole's advance work nor Dante's briefing had accounted for. Cole's men were already moving toward the hardware store. Dante got back to his feet. The shoulder hurt with the specific, insistent quality of a wound that had not yet been processed by shock. Not debilitating, not arterial, but real and demanding and getting louder by the second. He pressed his hand against it, and he kept moving toward the motel, because the only thing that mattered right now was the locked door 60 yards ahead and the woman and child behind it. He reached the door. He knocked. 3 knocks. Deliberate. A pause. Then her voice, tight and controlled. "Carmen." "It's me," he said. "Open the door." The lock turned. The door opened. She saw him, saw his hand pressed to his shoulder, saw the blood, and her face did something complicated that she didn't have time to manage. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine. Sit down, Dante." He sat down on the edge of the bed. She was already moving. Bathroom. Back with towels. Her hands on his jacket, easing it off the shoulder with a brisk, practical care that held no tenderness, and all of it at once. She pressed the towel against the wound, and he inhaled sharply through his teeth. Through and through, she said. I think so. She checked. Yes. She pressed harder. You need a hospital. In a little while. Now. Give me 10 minutes, he said. He looked up at her. She was standing over him, pressing the towel to his shoulder, her face inches from his, and there was something in her expression that she wasn't bothering to hide right now because there wasn't time, and because some things don't stay hidden when the person you're trying to be done with has just walked through your door, bleeding. 10 minutes, then I'll go. She held his gaze. She pressed the towel. She said nothing. Noah slept on the bed beside them, completely undisturbed, his small chest rising and falling in the uncomplicated rhythm of a child who did not yet know what kind of world he'd been born into, or what his father had just walked through to get back to this room. Dante looked at his son. He looked at Alina's hands on his shoulder. He thought about what she'd said at the door when he was leaving. Come back. He had come back. The question now. The real question. The one that would take not minutes but months to answer. Not a single conversation, but hundreds of small ones. Not a gesture, but a sustained and unglamorous and imperfect effort. Was whether coming back was enough to build anything on. He didn't know. She didn't know either. But she was still pressing the towel to his shoulder, and Noah was still breathing steadily on the bed beside them, and outside the window the sky over Marin's Cove was turning from gray to something that was almost, at its eastern edge, beginning to. The hospital in the nearest town was 40 minutes from Marin's Cove. Alina drove. She didn't ask if he wanted her to drive. She took the keys from his jacket pocket while Cole's man applied a field dressing to the shoulder, and she put Noah in the car seat that Cole's people had retrieved from her apartment along with a second bag of his things, and she drove with the focused, unhurried precision of someone who has decided that panic is a luxury they cannot afford. Dante sat in the passenger seat with his head back and his eyes open, watching the road. Noah slept in the back. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Alina said, still watching the road, Petrov, is he contained? Yes. The other 6? Cole has them. And the shooter on the roof? Contained. She nodded. Her hands on the wheel were steady, her jaw was set. He watched her profile in the pre-dawn dark, and he thought about the woman who had stood in the nursery on the night everything began to fall apart. Not less than this woman, but different. Less certain of her own architecture. Still learning what she was made of. She knew now. The 18 months had told her. Serena, she said. The name came out flat, not with rage. That surprised him, though he should have expected it. She had never been a person who weaponized her anger. She used it privately and then set it down. She'll face charges, he said. Fraud, conspiracy, the financial crimes. My lawyers have the full confession and the paper trail Marco built. The DA's office has been contacted through a clean channel. It moves forward without my direct fingerprints on the prosecution. She'll get a lawyer who makes a deal, Alina said. She will, he said. She'll serve time. Less than she deserves. That's how it works. Alina was quiet for a moment. Does it bother you? What? That it's less than she deserves. He considered the question honestly. A year ago it would have, he said. I would have wanted something more complete. Something that matched the scale of what she did. He paused. Now I'm more interested in what comes after than in making sure the accounting is exact. She glanced at him briefly. Back to the road. That's different from how you used to think, she said. Yes, he said. It is. The hospital was a small regional medical center, underfunded and fluorescent lit and staffed at 5:30 in the morning by a tired ER nurse named Deb, who looked at Dante's shoulder with the professional detachment of someone who had seen worse on a Tuesday. She cleaned the wound, through and through, as Alina had assessed, no arterial involvement, structurally intact, and she asked how it happened, and Dante said hunting accident. And Deb looked at him with the expression of a woman who had heard that particular explanation several times before and had decided over the course of a long career that knowing the truth of these things was above her pay grade. She stitched him up. She gave him antibiotics and a prescription for pain medication he knew he wouldn't fill and instructions he would follow approximately half of. She told him to see an orthopedic specialist within the week and to avoid lifting anything heavy. Alina, sitting in the chair by the bed with Noah in her lap, said nothing during any of this. But when the nurse left and they were alone in the curtained bay, she looked up from Noah and said, "You're going to see the specialist." "Alina, that's not a negotiation," she said. "That's a condition." He looked at her. She looked back. "Okay," he said. Something in her face shifted. Small, almost invisible. The particular quality of a woman registering that a man has said, "okay," and meant it, which is a different sound than when they say it and don't. They drove back to Marin's Cove as the sun came up. It arrived sideways across the ocean, the way coastal light does. Gradual and then sudden, the water going from black to gray to the particular silver gold of an autumn morning. Alina drove toward it, and Noah woke up as they crossed back into town, making the sounds that meant he was hungry, and she pulled into the parking lot of the diner on Main Street, and she fed him in the back seat, while Dante sat outside on a bench with his arm in the sling the hospital had given him and watched the town begin its morning. A woman walked a dog. A man in a yellow vest opened the hardware store across the street, the same one whose roof had been used as a position 5 hours earlier, now back to being just a hardware store. A teenager on a bicycle rode past without looking up from her phone. The ordinary morning machinery of a small town that had no idea what had happened in its streets before sunrise. Cole appeared beside him at 7:15. He sat down on the bench without being asked. "Petrov talked," Cole said. "Everything?" "Enough." The contract was Serena's personal arrangement, not Korovin's operation. Petrov confirms it was off-book. She paid him privately from an account in the Caymans, one of the ones the forensic audit hadn't surfaced yet. Korovin has no stake in this, no retribution coming from that direction. Dante exhaled. The account. "Marco's already flagged it. We'll have it frozen by end of business today." "Good." He leaned back on the bench. The sling was uncomfortable. He adjusted it. "And the men she sent, Petrov's people. 3 have priors. The other 3 are freelance, no organizational affiliation. My recommendation is we hand all 6 to the authorities through the same clean channel as the Serena case. Let the federal charges cover everything. Keeps our fingerprints off the enforcement end." "Do it," Dante said. Cole nodded. He sat for a moment. In 9 years of working together, Cole Briggs was not a man who sat on benches unless he had something to say that required the sitting-down version of a conversation. "What are you going to do?" Cole said. Dante looked at him. "With the organization," Cole said. "The whole structure. After this." Dante was quiet for a moment. A seagull landed on the parking lot 10 feet away, looked at them with the assessing yellow eye of an animal that has learned humans sometimes have food, determined they did not, and flew away. "I've been thinking about it for a while," Dante said. "Not just since this. Before this." He watched the seagull go. "There are things that can be restructured. Legitimate operations that are large enough to sustain on their own if the other layers are removed. It's a 2-year process, maybe 3. Some people go away. Some things get unwound in ways that attract attention. It's a risk," Cole said. "Everything is a risk," Dante said. "The question is what you're risking it for." He paused. "I have a son. I'd like him to be able to say his father's name without it meaning something he has to explain away." Cole said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I've been thinking about retirement anyway." Dante looked at him. Cole was 47 years old and had the face of a man who had been serious his entire adult life and was considering, possibly for the first time, what it might feel like to stop. "My sister's been asking me to come to Portland, help with her restaurant. She thinks I could run the kitchen logistics." "You'd be bored in a month," Dante said. "Probably," Cole said, "but bored is underrated." They sat in a silence that had the quality of something concluded rather than something interrupted. The morning light was getting stronger, warming the parking lot, warming the bench, warming the salt-tinged air of this town that Dante had arrived in 20 hours ago as a stranger and was leaving, not yet, but soon, as something he didn't have a word for yet. He went back to the car when Alina knocked on the window. She was in the front seat with Noah settled in the back, and she looked at Dante when he got in and she said, "I need to go home. Get him settled. Let him have his morning." "Okay," he said. "You can come," she said, carefully. The words placed with precision. "For a little while, if you want." He looked at her. "I want," he said. Her apartment above the office was small and filled with the particular organized chaos of a life built for a child. A bouncy seat in the corner of the living room, board books stacked on the coffee table, a mat of colorful foam squares covering most of the floor. A half-finished architectural drawing was pinned to a board on one wall. There were photographs. Noah at various ages in the 7 months of his existence, newborn, and then less newborn, and then more himself with each one. A series of them on the windowsill. A single one on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, showing Alina and Noah together. Her face turned toward him, his face turned toward the camera, both of them caught in the middle of something ordinary. Dante stood in the middle of the living room and took it in. Alina put Noah on the foam mat, and he immediately rolled and reached for a plastic toy and put it in his mouth with the wholehearted commitment of an 8-month-old for whom this was the most important thing happening in the world. Dante lowered himself carefully to the floor. The shoulder protested, and he sat cross-legged at the edge of the mat, and he watched his son. Noah looked at him. With the direct, evaluating gaze of a baby who has not yet learned that staring is impolite, he looked at Dante for a long moment. Then he held out the plastic toy. The gesture was probably reflex, probably just the motor movement of an infant who holds things out because holding things out is interesting. It was probably not deliberate. It was probably not a choice. Dante took the toy. He held it. He looked at it. A red plastic ring, slightly chewed at one edge. He held it back out. Noah took it. He put it back in his mouth. He looked at Dante again with those dark, assessing eyes. "Hi," Dante said quietly. The same thing Alina had said to him in the hospital room 8 months ago, though he didn't know that. "I'm your father." Noah made a sound, not a word. He was 8 months old, sounds were the whole language, but a sound with intention behind it, directed, a response. Alina was in the kitchen. She had turned the kettle on. She was doing something with her hands at the counter, her back to the room, and she stayed that way for a few minutes, giving them the space of it. Dante stayed on the floor. Noah crawled, unsteadily, with great determination, toward the bouncy seat, and then changed his mind and crawled back. He did this twice. On the third approach, he stopped halfway and sat down abruptly, the way babies sit when their legs have decided they're done, and he looked at Dante again. Dante reached out and touched the top of Noah's head very lightly, just his palm, brief, a gesture so gentle it barely registered as contact. Noah looked at him. "I know," Dante said, quietly enough that it wasn't meant for anyone but the two of them. "I know I wasn't here. I'm going to be here now." That's not an explanation. It's just what comes next. Alina set a mug of tea on the coffee table near him. She sat on the couch. She pulled her knees up and wrapped her hands around her own mug, and she watched the two of them on the floor with an expression that had no easy name. Not forgiveness, not its opposite, something more complicated and more honest than either, the expression of a woman holding two true things at once without resolving them into something simpler. They stayed like that for a long time. The morning moved through the windows. Noah eventually fell asleep on the mat, with his face pressed against the edge of a board book, the deep, sudden sleep of an infant who runs entirely on instinct. And Alina brought a blanket and covered him without picking him up, and she sat back on the couch. "What happens now?" she said. Not a question exactly, more the shape of one. "I go back to the city," Dante said. He was still on the floor, sitting now with his back against the couch rather than cross-legged, the shoulder less angry in that position. "I deal with what needs to be dealt with. The legal process, the organizational restructuring, the financial unwinding. It's going to take time. And Serena, she'll be arrested within the week. The DA has enough. She'll fight it and lose. The timeline is the timeline." He paused. "I can't make it faster, and I'm not going to pretend I can." Alina nodded. "I want to come back," he said. "Regularly. Whatever schedule you're comfortable with. I'm not asking to be—" He stopped. He started again. "I'm not asking you for anything except to be allowed to know him. Everything else is yours to decide." She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was full now, coming through the windows without apology, lighting the room the way it would light any room on any ordinary morning, indifferent to the weight of what was being said inside it. "My lawyer will contact yours," she said. "We do this with documentation, visitation schedule, legal terms, everything written down." "Whatever you want," he said. "I want him protected," she said. I want the arrangement structured in a way that he can't be used, can't be made into a target, can't be leverage, can't be collateral in whatever is still left of your world. I'm working on reducing what's left of my world, he said. I know, she said. Work faster. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something in that neighborhood. She looked at it and looked away. I'm not the same person I was, she said. Not defensively, just factually, the way you state geography. What I was willing to tolerate, what I was willing to shape myself around, that's gone. I'm not going back to being the person who made dinner at midnight and didn't ask questions. I know that. I'm not sure you do, she said. Not fully. You're looking at this situation, and I think part of you still believes that if enough things are fixed, if Serena is dealt with and the evidence is clear and the legal structure is right, that the rest follows from that there's a version of this where we get back what we had. He looked at her. Is that wrong? What we had wasn't enough, she said. It wasn't bad. I'm not saying it was bad, but it wasn't enough. You were somewhere else most of the time you were there, and I was... She looked down at the mug in her hands. I was making myself smaller to fit into the space I'd been given. I didn't know that's what I was doing until I stopped doing it, until I had to be the whole size of myself because there was nobody else to take up the slack. He was quiet for a long time. I don't want you smaller, he said. I know you don't, she said. I think you actually never did. I think that was my own failure as much as yours. She looked up. But knowing that doesn't undo the year. It doesn't undo the courtroom. It doesn't undo me sitting on a hospital floor alone counting minutes until I stopped shaking. The silence between them had changed quality across the morning, had moved from the cold, braced silence of the night, through the operational silence of the crisis, and into something different now. Something that was, for the first time, simply honest. Two people without a performance between them, without anything left to manage or protect. I'm not asking you to undo it, he said. I'm asking for something to build on the other side of it. She looked at him. I don't know if there's something to build, she said. I know, he said. I'm going to be here either way, for Noah. Whatever you decide about the rest, I'm going to show up for him. That's not contingent on anything. She nodded slowly. She set her mug down on the coffee table. She uncurled from the couch and stood, and she walked to the window and looked out at the main street below, at the ordinary, continuing life of Marin's Cove on a weekday morning. And she stood there for a moment with her arms crossed loosely, not defensively, just holding herself the way a person holds themselves when they are thinking something they haven't finished yet. Come back on Sunday, she said finally. 3 hours. We'll see how he does with you. Okay, he said. Dante. She turned from the window. If you miss a Sunday, if something comes up, if the city calls, if there's any reason you decide you can't be here, call me 24 hours before. Don't let him wait for someone who isn't coming. He's 8 months old and he doesn't know yet what waiting means, but he will know. And I will not let him learn that lesson from you. The weight of it landed on him precisely as she'd meant it to, not as an accusation, as a requirement. The difference between those two things was everything. I will be here every Sunday, he said. You have my word. She looked at him for a moment. His word had meant something, once. She was not ready to say it meant something again, but she was willing to let it be tested, which was not nothing. I'll make coffee, she said. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, he said. That tracks, she said, and she went into the kitchen. He stayed on the floor beside Noah. His son was asleep with one fist curled under his cheek, the other hand open and relaxed, his small chest moving in the deep, unhurried rhythm of someone for whom the world was still, fundamentally, safe. Dante did not know yet whether he deserved any credit for that, for the safety of this morning, for the town still standing, for the 6 men contained and the contract neutralized, and the 7th shooter taken off that rooftop. He suspected the accounting of what he deserved was going to be a long and inconclusive process. He was willing to do it anyway. 3 weeks later, Serena Vale was arrested at her apartment in the city on charges of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and financial crimes totaling over $2 million when the full forensic audit was complete. She was processed and released on bail and retained a defense attorney who, by all accounts, was genuinely excellent. She would fight it. She would fight it for a long time. She would lose. The proceedings took 14 months. The plea agreement she eventually accepted carried a sentence of 6 years, of which she would serve 4 with good behavior. On the day the agreement was signed, Marco De Luca sat in his office and looked at the final forensic report one more time, and then put it in the filing cabinet and went home and ate dinner with his wife, and didn't think about it again for a long time. Rosa Fuentes retired from the Moretti household in December of that year. She had been planning to do so for 3 years and simply hadn't gotten around to it. At her retirement dinner, a small thing, family, and a few longtime staff, the kind of event Dante had not previously made time for and now made time for because he had started, deliberately and imperfectly, making time for different things. She hugged him for a long time and said nothing, which was more than most people managed. The organizational restructuring took 2 years and 4 months. It was not clean. Some of it attracted the attention of federal investigators who watched it happen without quite being able to determine whether they were witnessing compliance or strategic dismantling, and ultimately concluded it was both, and that pursuing it was less productive than allowing it to complete. 3 lieutenants were arrested in unrelated operations during that period. 2 more resigned and took their portions of the legitimate business with them under negotiated terms. What remained at the end of it was smaller and slower and less powerful and entirely legal. A real estate holding company, 2 restaurant groups, a logistics firm that had always been clean, and a financial consulting operation that Marco De Luca agreed, after considerable persuasion, to stay on and run. Cole Briggs moved to Portland. He lasted 6 weeks before his sister put him in charge of the restaurant's supply chain operations, which turned out to suit him better than he expected. He called Dante occasionally. The calls were short and without ceremony, which was how both of them preferred it. Dante drove to Marin's Cove every Sunday. He did not miss one. Not when the restructuring hit its most critical phase and there were lawyers calling every hour. Not when the federal attention spiked and his own counsel advised him to maintain an extremely low profile for 30 days. Not when Noah had a fever on a Sunday in February and Alina called to say maybe this wasn't a good week, and Dante said he'd bring soup and sit outside on the steps, if that was what made sense. He just wanted to be close by, and after a pause she said, "Come in." He came in. He sat on the couch with Noah on his chest, the baby hot and fussy and miserable, and he held him for 3 hours while Alina slept in the next room for the first time in 2 days. When she woke up and came out and found them, Dante on the couch, Noah finally sleeping on his chest, Dante's hand curved around his son's small back. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she went to make tea, and she didn't say anything about it. But she didn't say anything against it either. The trust between them rebuilt the way most real things are built. Not in moments, but in the accumulation of ordinary instances. The Sunday he showed up with a set of wooden building blocks because he'd passed a toy store and remembered Noah had started pulling himself to standing and thought he might like something to stack and knock over. The afternoon. Alina's office had a plumbing emergency, and she called him not because she needed rescuing, but because he was the only person she knew who would handle the contractor without making it a production. And he drove down on a Wednesday and handled the contractor and left without staying for dinner, because she hadn't invited him to stay for dinner, and showing up correctly on a Wednesday was worth more than pushing past the edges of what had been offered. The slow, deliberate way he learned to read what she needed and to stop himself from offering more than that. The afternoon in April, 8 months after the morning in the motel room, when Noah took 4 unsteady steps across the foam mat and then sat down hard and laughed, the full, astonished, delighted laugh of a child discovering a new thing about his body. And Alina and Dante both looked up from opposite sides of the room and caught each other's eyes in the instinctive, immediate way of 2 people sharing something irreplaceable, and neither of them looked away for a long moment. She looked away first, but she was smiling when she did. He did not say anything about it. He would have, once. He would have pressed it, read it as an opening, said something that was probably the right thing said at the wrong speed. He was learning, at 43 years old, to let things exist at the pace they needed. That evening, after Noah was in bed and Alina was reviewing something at the drafting table and Dante was on the couch with a contract document he'd brought from the city, she said without looking up, "He's going to be walking everywhere by next week." "I know," Dante said. "The foam mats aren't going to be enough." "I can get corner guards for the furniture," he said. "The coffee table edges." She looked up. She looked at him across the room with the particular quality of consideration she'd always had. The look that saw more than it let on, that had always been, in his worst moments, the thing he'd most wanted to withstand, and couldn't. "You know how to install corner guards?" she said. "I can learn," he said. She looked at him for another moment, then she went back to the drafting table. But she said, "There's a hardware store on Main Street. They open at 8. "I'll be there at 8, he said. They stayed like that, in the quiet of the apartment, the town outside going about its evening, Noah sleeping in the back room with the nightlight casting its crescent moon glow across the crib, the same crib Alina had brought from the city, the one she'd chosen herself from the small furniture maker 2 hours outside, the one she'd assembled alone at 8 months pregnant in this apartment with instructions in 3 languages and a borrowed screwdriver. At some point, Dante set down the contract document, and he did not pick it up again. At some point, Alina turned off the light above the drafting table. At some point, the quiet between them became simply the quiet of a room at the end of a day, which is a different thing from the silence of 2 people with something to manage. He left at 9. He said goodnight at the door. She said goodnight. No more than that. But when he reached the bottom of the stairs and looked back up, the light in the hallway was still on, and her shadow was still in the doorway. He drove back to the city on the highway that ran out of ambition somewhere past the 3rd rest stop. The night was clear and cold, and the road was mostly empty this late on a Sunday. He thought about the forensic report, the one Dr. Harrow had sent, the one that still lived in the folder in the safe behind the bookshelf in the study, the one whose 12-point Times New Roman had said everything that needed saying in the plainest possible terms. He had, about a month ago, done something he hadn't told anyone about. He had taken it out of the folder. He had taken it to a framer, a small framing shop, not a place that knew him, a shop on a street he didn't usually use, and he had asked for a simple frame, dark wood, nothing elaborate, and he had put the report on the wall of the study when he got home. Not as proof of anything, not as a reminder directed outward, at the world or at Serena or at any of the people who had watched him make the worst decision of his life without stopping him. As a reminder directed at himself. A single piece of paper in a dark wood frame saying, "You were wrong, and here's the evidence, and look at it." He passed the 3rd rest stop. He drove for a while in the silence of a man who had made enormous mistakes and was doing the long, undramatic, insufficient work of becoming someone worth knowing. There was no clean end to it. There was no moment where the accounting balanced, where the cost was paid and the ledger closed. There was only the driving and the Sunday after this one, and the corner guards from the hardware store that opened at 8, and the particular trust of a child who did not know yet that it was his father's hands that had first held him. On the morning the world outside his window was going from black to gray to silver to something just beginning to look like light. The highway opened up ahead of him. The city was an hour away. Dante Moretti drove toward it in the dark, and for the first time in longer than he could account for, the cold feeling in his chest was simply gone. In its place was something he did not have a name for yet. He thought he might have time to figure out what to call it.